Hello. Thank you for choosing to join myself and my colleagues as you take part in California Association of the Education of Young Children this year. This is definitely a nice learning curve for us as well as we engage in this remotely. I've had the pleasure of being part of this conference a few times now as a presenter, and as a participant, and I always take something out of it. And I also recognize that there's a lot of choices, so that you've chosen to be with myself and my team. I am grateful, and I hope that this is useful for you. All right. So today what we're going to share about is our presentation called Let's Play, Supporting Meaningful Inclusion for Young Children Utilizing Augmentative and Alternative Communication, or AAC, Systems in the Inclusive Classroom. I'm going to introduce my team, and you will see them all throughout the duration of this workshop. And we also have an agenda coming up. But before I do, let's set the stage. This is a vignette that we wrote that kind of helps start, and we'll revisit it a few times throughout the presentation. Marcina scanned the cubbies in her inclusive preschool classroom, taking note of the names and corresponding photos that represented the children in her class. As with most years, the group was diverse in their identities, including race, culture, disabilities, abilities, and language and communication use. Marcina wanted to ensure that these identities were acknowledged and valued, and that the children had opportunity to learn from and interact with each other. This included Diego, who was 4, whose face lit up with the mention of swimming, and his dog Max. Diego was born with the need for extensive supports across all developmental areas, including communication. He had recently been successful in communicating by pressing an access switch to initiate a cause and effect response in which a light would turn on and off and a bell would ring louder. The latter had especially delighted Diego, and this interest was leading the way to have Diego make choices between two activities and preferences utilizing these switches. What Marcina wanted to consider now was how to build a classroom community that valued different means of communication, including augmentative and alternative communication systems, AAC. Marcina had experience with including children who had different home languages than English, including Spanish and Cantonese. However, this would be her first time supporting inclusion with an AAC system user. Marcina was grateful for the beginning of a strong relationship with Diego's team, including his family and speech language pathologists, to work together on this goal. We will keep revisiting Marcina and Diego's story as a way to kind of illustrate some of the key points. As I know I am talking to the choir in this because of this awesome conference and who comes, we know that early childhood education settings is often the child's first community outside of a home and can play a really influential role in learning how to value and interact with one another. It's often here where kids further construct their own self-identities within social situations with their peers and adults, and they begin to notice and question similarities and differences with each other. And this can include skin color, gender differences, family structure, and language use. We know early educators play a significant role in supporting children in learning about themselves, helping them acknowledge and value differences, and just facilitating a learning difference in which all kids are included. A really key aspect of this community building is fostering means of communication, for this is how we share information with one another and form connections. It's really vital for us to be able to communicate, as it's an essential part of how an individual is included, because it can facilitate our access, it can support participation, and promote learning. For early educators, this can look really different, right? This might be supporting emerging communication for young children as they develop their vocabulary and understanding of reciprocal language. It could also mean acknowledging and valuing different languages that a child and family use and are learning within their classroom. And such is the case with Diego in our vignette, it is facilitating ways to augment existing communication skills or provide an alternative to verbal communication, which is essential for some individuals. This is helping form and support an individual's AAC system. In the United States, there's an estimated of at least 12% of young children who are requiring special education services that require extensive supports for their communication. This could include individuals diagnosed with congenital disabilities, perhaps like autism, developmental disabilities, cerebral palsy, and more, in which support is needed to not only represent existing language, but also aid in language acquisition and literacy development. Alternatively, some individuals may have been diagnosed with acquired disabilities, like having experienced traumatic or acquired brain injuries or a neurodegenerative disease, in which the effective communication systems or supports are dependent on the intactfulness of language and cognitive abilities at the time of the accident or as the condition progresses. So, different ways in which AAC systems might need to come into play. The purpose of our workshop today is to try and provide a framework specifically thinking about early educators or people who work in early education settings in supporting meaningful inclusion for young children that are using AAC systems. We are going to begin with having a brief overview of what AAC systems may look like in early childhood settings. We're then going to talk about ways for early educators to reflect and act upon ways that they can support community building and peer interactions and play within their early childhood classroom, in turn to make inclusion meaningful for all types of communication uses, including AAC. We're going to talk about this first in terms of thinking about just the classroom learning environment as a whole and give ways for us to reflect and think about what we can do in order to make this an inclusive environment of all these types of communications. We're going to think about small group instruction in play and how to help support a young AAC user in being included, not only in teacher initiated small group activities, like maybe centers or an art activity when you're working with a small group, but also in trying to think about child initiated small groups like play or centers or when games are being played. And finally, we're going to talk about targeted learning opportunities, where we think about the fact that likely a child that is using an AAC system to communicate is going to need practice and support in learning how to do this from their team, whether it's from the early childhood educator, an early childhood special educator, a speech language pathologist, an assistive technology consultant or coach or more. So thinking about that, how can we still utilize these kind of opportunities to promote inclusion and peer engagement? I'm hoping by the time we get to the conclusion and reflection, when you will see me again, that you will have many ideas and that I will help you be able to bring them together so that you can think about how to take this into your own professional setting. And as part of that, I will show you a reflection tool that allows you to consider these different areas that might be able to better support inclusion of AAC users and use it not only to enact as a plan for yourself in an early childhood setting, but also to bring back within your interdisciplinary team so you can think meaningfully about how to promote inclusion. I have the pleasure of working with a team. And we have the opportunity right now at San Francisco State University to be working together on Office of Special Education Programs grant through the federal government, in which we have been able to recruit and train early childhood special educators and speech language pathologists together. And it's a beautiful program because we're able to support their tuition by giving them stipends. And have been able to have them train together in numerous different courses and learning opportunities. It has also helped foster our collaboration between our program and the Department of Speech Language Hearing Sciences. We are pleased to be able to present together on something that we feel really passionate about and that we're writing about and that we hope to continue even when this grant is completed. Myself, I'm Amber Friesen, and I'm an associate professor at San Francisco State University, and I coordinate the early childhood special education program. And you can see me with my daughter, Sibley, who's 3, and I also have a 6-year-old son as well with my partner. You are also going to hear from my colleagues Marissa Mitch, Karina Dew, and Teresa Gray. And I'm going to let them all introduce themselves more fully. But I can say it's just a pleasure to be able to work with them all. So with that, I'm going to pass on the presentation to Teresa Gray, and you will hear from me again at the end of the presentation. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Teresa Gray. I'm a speech-language pathologist, and it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about AAC systems. AAC systems seek to address extensive support needs with communication through the use of a variety of techniques and tools, including picture communication boards, line drawings, speech generating devices, tangible objects, manual signs, gestures, and finger spelling. Ways to augment existing communication skills or provide an alternative to verbal communication is essential, forming an individual's AAC system. AAC systems can encompass a wide variety of communication modalities that enable an individual to share ideas and feelings without spoken language. There are 2 main types of AAC systems, unaided and aided, that can be used individually or in combination with each other. Unaided AAC systems refer to ways we communicate using our bodies, including gestures, facial expression, body language, and sign language. Keep in mind that for an unaided AAC system to be successful, the individual using it must have adequate motor control, and the communication partner must be able to understand the intended message. For individuals with severe disabilities, it may be useful to use both unaided and aided AAC systems. And of course, the child must be taught when to use each system. For instance, at home with a parent or caregiver, signing might be appropriate, but at school, a picture-based system might be a better means of communication. Aided AAC systems use some type of external tool or device. These types of tools can rely on low or light technology options, such as pictures and photographs, writing tools, communication boards, or books. Aided AAC systems may also require technology options, including speech-generating devices, recordable or digitized devices, and AAC software used on a computer or tablet that utilizes symbol or language representation. When choosing an aided AAC system, the individual's skills and needs must be considered, as well as the individual's potential. Aided AAC systems have options for different symbols and access modes. Thus, we must also take into account the context and environment where the aided AAC system will be used. Further, assessment of strategies includes understanding the skills and supports available to communication partners, and of course, understanding the individual's vision, hearing skills, their motivation, as well as linguistic and literacy skills. In order for the AAC system to be effective, its ability to be individualized with the goal of developing competence to freely express ideas, thoughts, and feelings to others across settings is necessary. Early exposure and use of AAC systems can promote functional communication and positively benefit development across domains including cognition, early literacy, and social interactions with young children. A successful communication system evolves with an individual's changing language and physical needs, the context they reside within, the, the people they want to communicate with, and how they want to communicate. The interdisciplinary team involved in supporting the learning and development of a child with significant communication needs can include many individuals, including each contributing their expertise to plan and implement supports and services. Central to this is the child and family, as their expertise, values, and goals for their child are essential to decision making and should be prioritized by the team. This is especially important with the use of an AAC system in order to ensure a child can utilize these tools to communicate with different people within different environments. For example, the school or home or community. Other key team members, such as a speech language pathologist and an assistive technology consultant, will likely have extensive knowledge of both unaided and aided AAC systems and be able to guide assessment intervention and capacity building among the team related to this. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marissa, and I am excited to be here presenting to you with my colleagues Amber, Teresa, and Karina. I work in the Early Childhood Special Education program as an assistant professor. And previous to joining SF State, I was an early childhood special education teacher in a special day class, as well as inclusive programs. I also served as a coach between early childhood education and early childhood special education programs. So I'm excited to have you all here today virtually joining us. And what I will be talking about today is how to look at the classroom learning environment as we consider supporting meaningful inclusion of AAC users. So when we think about early educators and the need to facilitate a learning community in which all children feel membership and have opportunities to interact meaningfully together with the peers in that classroom, we need to kind of consider different diverse ways how communication is acknowledged and how communication is shown value in a program or classroom. So this includes creating a community that is inclusive of young children or young AAC systems users. So in the next part that I will transition to, we will be suggesting some different areas for early educators to reflect and act upon that can support inclusion within early childhood classrooms or programs that are inclusive of AAC systems users in a large classroom learning environment. And then my colleagues will also be talking about small group instruction and play and targeted learning opportunities. So when we think about the early childhood classroom, in this classroom, we really provide an important environment where children kind of begin to construct their sense of self. They think about and learn to question their environment and those interactions around them. They also acknowledge, value, and interact with others and their peers. And so in taking cues from their environment, that includes both adults and peers, children begin to either feel proud, shamed, or conflicted about their identities and about their attitudes toward human differences. And that is from German, Sparks, and Olson Edwards, 2020. So when we think about this, the foundational component of fostering peer interactions is ensuring that the physical environment is healthy, safe, and supportive for all children. So for children utilizing AAC systems, this includes the necessity of having the physical space within a program, within a classroom environment, to ensure that needed resources for that child or children, such as mobility aids, communication boards, tablets, or even switches, can be included in all aspects of the schedule and routine and within that classroom. So by ensuring that children can physically participate alongside their peers during daily activities in the routine, we notice that there will be more opportunities for interactions, and those will occur throughout the day. We also realize that there will be added inclusive opportunities for peer exposure and involvement. So this includes like transitions between activities, say sitting with peers during routines like a snack, maybe accessing outdoor play equipment, and partaking in different field trips or nature walks. So as it relates to NAEYC's program standards, we are thinking really about how relationships, curriculum, environment, teaching, and family all play an interconnected role in supporting communication. And in this case, particularly supporting those young children with AAC systems. When we think about Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, we think about sort of how inclusion fits into this. So inclusion can be fostered within the classroom learning environment by something called UDL. And UDL ensures that multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action or expression are considered. And the ultimate goal of UDL is to develop these expert learners who are each in their own way resourceful and knowledgeable. They are strategic and goal directed, purposeful and motivated within their learning environments. And this is all kind of from UDL, and the website there is there for you if you choose to explore it more. And so what this means is we are thinking about the what, the why, and the how in a classroom environment or early childhood environment. So the what being representation, the why being engagement, and how being action and expression. So first I'm going to talk about each of these three a little bit briefly, and then on the following slides I will share ideas and considerations specific to early childhood levels and kind of bring it down to thinking about our young learners. So as we're looking here at the slide, the UDL guidelines are organized both horizontally and vertically. And without getting too much into the weeds or details about this, as I mentioned, the engagement, representation, and action and expression you can see on the slide here. And they also talk about, when we think about, say, the access row, for instance, what you see here, it also includes guidelines that suggest ways to increase access to the learning goal by offering options for, say, recruiting interest, say, for a learning area or an activity happening in a routine or classroom, thinking about providing options for perception, so having different options for young learners to explore and to engage with, and then also providing options for physical action, so physical movement. So when I think about UDL and this multiple means of representation, so for representation, we are considering how children's different identities are being represented within the early childhood classroom and how that representation can promote positive self-identity development and therefore increasing confidence to initiate interactions with their peers. So an example of this may be, instead of discussing a culture, holiday, language, or even difference, a different type of difference for maybe a day, or having one single use material or image to represent an entire identity, the team or the program there puts in some effort to represent children and their families authentically and continuously in an ongoing way. So we also think about applying this specifically to AAC systems users and communication. Reflection could include some questions you may ask yourself, and these are noted on the slide. So do photographs, posters, and classroom signage represent the value of different means of communication and interactions, including AAC systems? For example, is there a visual representation of children using switches, eye gaze, pointing, communication boards, or tablets to communicate with a peer? Are there dolls or other play materials that represent different means of communication, including components of AAC systems? So an example would be accessories for dolls or stuffed animals that include a communication board or include a switch or include a tablet even. Could extra communication switches be part of a center for all children to engage with? And so having maybe the one with the individual child who's an AAC system user, and then having a couple of extras or even one extra to put into a center so other children are able to engage with that throughout the program day. Also think about, do adults in the classroom consistently support and value different means of communication? Thinking about classroom materials or areas that are labeled using different ways the children communicate in the classroom, including different languages and visuals of an AAC system. Are picture symbols within a child's AAC system also utilized in songs and stories, say during circle time or other parts throughout the day? Does the classroom have books that represent different means of communication? This could include depictions of children's or kids using AAC systems or incorporating the specific visuals that you see as part of a child's communication system. So an option for this is to make books, homemade books using photographs and children's drawings to match AAC systems or symbols that are used. So there's a few different ways that you can really incorporate and integrate multiple means of representation in early childhood programs. When we think about multiple means of engagement, this is sort of the second component of UDL, and this is thinking about facilitating engagement to spark motivation and interest in learning, which we know is really important at the early childhood level. So we think about how early educators can facilitate, how kids participate, make sense of, and create concepts about others from the opportunities, responses, and resources that are provided within this program or classroom setting. Specific to facilitating engagement with children that use AAC systems, some reflections as educators you could consider include how educators can draw upon the strengths of all children to best elicit peer engagement and provide opportunities for all children to be experts and spark meaningful engagement with peers. So, for example, as described in our vignette with Diego, we know that Diego loves his dog. So perhaps consider having children bring in a picture of their pet from home or their favorite animals to view and discuss together in a center. This would, as long as you ensure ample time for Diego to share about his dog and what they do together as part of the activity, along with the other kids in that learning area. So this is similar to early childhood educators, and we know that we do these kinds of things all the time. So you really just want to think about and build off of children's interests and strengths, and sort of what do you know already about the kids and the families that you have in your program? How can you honor their uniqueness and diversity, including their communication needs, so that multiple opportunities to practice these communication systems and interactions with peers can be evident in multiple routines throughout the day? You also might consider how peers are engaged in the AAC system that the child is utilizing. We want to think about exposure and multiple opportunities for them to meaningfully and positively engage. So we might think about these sort of as being tools, and they can be somewhat enticing to kids, but they also might be seen as different or unapproachable. And so we want to think about when peers are able to interact with similar materials and learn about communication strategies because they've had exposure and they've been able to meaningfully and positively engage, that we can increase those peer-to-peer interactions and really foster those relationships. So if a child is using a voice recorded switch, could peers have access to their own switch to record, or perhaps even share with the permission of the child who is that user? Or you might want to think about multiple switches being utilized in different learning centers or areas so that peers have many opportunities throughout the day or within a center or a few different centers to learn and to utilize that child's communication system. And through that, you're really deepening their understanding and hopefully support of diverse communication. You also may consider about engagement in social situations and how this engagement can be supported in groups throughout the day. So we might think about the dynamic of who does the child who's the AAC system user or different communication, how or who do they naturally gravitate to during the day? And how can we kind of foster or support that growing, blossoming relationship? So you might think about the different learning goals that they have for the you might think about the different learning goals that you have for the kids in the classroom. And you might think about how you can pair them together or group them together based off their strengths, based off their needs, and who they gravitate towards, right? Who do they kind of want to befriend in the program? So you might think about having assigned spots during circle time. You might think about forming small groups for rotating learning centers or areas, or even partnering children's as buddies for their nature walks or different types of special field trips. The last is multiple means of expression. This is the third component of UDL, and this is thinking about how we can ensure all children can express their thoughts, ideas, and understandings. So we want to think about, do adults model interactions with the child using AAC systems that exemplify the value of this form of expression that's being shared? So for example, you might think about how children see time is sort of back and forth communication between the AAC system user and perhaps an adult. So these AAC system communicates maybe in yes or no responses, they're pre-recorded switches, or there's a communication board. So do they observe how the child's communication using an AAC system is valued and how the educator responds to this communication in the same manner as if it were a verbal response, and how other kids would perhaps give their response? Do children in the program or classroom see how an AAC system user is recognized and called on as much as other children? You also might think about activities and play opportunities, and what those considerations are for planning in advance and preparing for an AAC systems user to be able to express themselves with their peers in these programs. So it's common for early childhood educators to plan in advance and to think about how each child or groups of children are going to participate and say circle time. So an example is perhaps recording a favorite song or saying maybe good morning on a switch that you can have programmed for that child to be able to participate in circle time. You also may think about how can the same consideration also be given to child-initiated classroom learning centers so that the child using the AAC system may have meaningful opportunities to express themselves. And lastly, are there consistent opportunities for the child using an AAC system to choose their communication partner? So as I kind of mentioned earlier, who do they gravitate towards? Who do they want to sit by? Who do they want to play with? And do they have the same opportunity for expression that other kids are able to have in the classroom if they have that AAC system? So is that child able to indicate who they would like to play with, which may represent who they feel accepted from, have common interests with, or who they want to learn more about? So do they have that opportunity to express themselves? So we talked about UDL and we talked about the large classroom environments. And next you will be learning about some more small groups and other fun things. So thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Karina and I'm a second-year doctoral student studying special education. I'm housed at San Francisco State University and the University of California, Berkeley. I'm excited to be here with my team presenting on ways to promote meaningful inclusion for students who are AAC users. I'm going to specifically be focusing on small group instruction, play, and targeted learning opportunities. So let's begin. So a key part of many early childhood settings is the use of small groups of children to support learning and development. So this might include more teacher-initiated learning opportunities, such as facilitating an art project, game, or teaching moment, or it could also be more child-initiated, where small groups of children are learning how to play, explore, and interact together. So many of the areas of reflection and action that my colleague Marissa had spoke about in this previous section that focused on classroom learning environment and universal design for learning are also going to be applicable and supportive of peer interactions within small groups. However, there might also be additional planning and scaffolding that is specific to smaller groups of children that might support students in being able to learn and interact with one another. Intentionally planning for teacher-initiated small groups can allow for educators to model the value of different ways of communication, but also teach peers how to interact with one another. So this is also a key time to really embed opportunities to work on children's learning goals with others and to also do so within a meaningful context. So in the classroom, that might look like conducting a group reading, doing an experiment together, leading a class discussion, or engaging in an activity that's facilitated by the teacher, such as making Play-Doh. So applying this to inclusion of an AAC user, there are a few things that we can consider when we're facilitating these activities or play. So how can planning for small group instruction encompass not only the child who's using an AAC system and how they interact with the content, but also in considering how they're engaging with peers? So for example, what kinds of discussions can be initiated about a topic or idea, and in turn, what responses may be important for us to consider for the child to have accessible? So if a child is focusing on learning how to respond to a certain way, such as making choices between two options, or if the child feels more confident in responding a certain way, such as with American Sign Language with yes or no, how can we facilitate interactions so that the child can meaningfully interact using these types of responses? Are there also opportunities to practice peer-to-peer interactions with the support of a teacher as part of small group instruction? So this might include sharing more about the components of a child's AAC system and how they're used to communicate, and how can someone else respectfully interact with the AAC. So just as we teach children to respect each other in verbal interactions, such as showing gratitude when someone shares, letting someone finish when they're speaking, or responding with inquiry, we also need to be able to do the same for children who are learning to interact with AAC users. So to help us visualize the concept of small groups, I'm going to refer us back to the vignette with our little guy, Diego. Marcina wanted to provide intentional opportunities to scaffold peer interactions for Diego and his communication needs. So recognizing that his switch was a novel experience for many students, she planned a small group activity around the topic of animal sounds. She also intentionally paired Diego with Kendrick and Jayla, two peers of interests. Marcina collaborated with Diego's speech language pathologist, Anima, to program two switches. One would be for Diego, and the second would be for his peers, and they were programmed with various animal sounds that would accompany the book I Went Walking by Sue Williams. As Marcina read, she paused, pointing at the hidden horse, and asked, "What did you see?" Jayla called out, "Una caballo, a horse. Well done, Jayla." Marcina sees Diego looking down at his switch and asks, "Diego, what sound does a horse make?" So he clicks on his switch and says, "Neigh." Marcina responds, "A horse says neigh. Diego, thank you for showing us how you use your switch." Marcina provides his peers a few turns at using the second switch as she finishes reading the story. So she concludes with thanking Diego for showing his peer how he communicates using his device, and also shares that everyone's voice is important in the classroom. Marcina then asks, "How did everyone like using the switch?" "It was cool," Kendrick responds. "I like how I can hear Diego." Diego smiles at his friend. Marcina reflects on the importance of supporting all children in developing positive self-identities in the classroom, and also scaffolding peer interactions. So in this scene, we can see how teacher Marcina thoughtfully embeds the use of a switch into the lesson, and she also provides opportunities for children to ask questions, experiment, and communicate using a switch. All the while, she's really embracing multiple forms of engagement within the activity and participation with peers. So important learning opportunities in early ed also comes from child-initiated play. I think about open-ended activities like engaging in sand play, playing at the water table, building blocks, any areas where children can actively construct and also engage with materials and peers. So there are many benefits in plays and how it supports children's development. It helps to foster self-regulation. So when thinking about supporting students in being able to concentrate in activity, and also how it is that they're emotionally regulating. I also think about language, so being able to practice both receptive and expressive communication. Cognitive skills, so thinking about children and how they're exploring cause and effect, measurement, learning about colors, counting, alphabets, and it's also embedded within the context of the activity. And also lastly, we also have to consider social skills that children are developing. So given the fluid nature of play, flexibility and care needs to be taken in how we scaffold, but also facilitate authentic peer interactions. And that includes a child who's using an AAC system. So there's a few things that we can consider. The first is the child who's using an AAC system provided the opportunity to make a choice in where they want to play? So we need to be able to honor the choice and preference by acknowledging and respecting where they want to play and also who they want to engage with, just as we do for all children. So we can do so by asking the child, seeking to understand their likes and dislikes, observing peers and who they tend to naturally gravitate towards, and also seeking information from families can all provide information as to where a child may want to play. How can tools also be in place to support child-initiated opportunities? So some of these tools for the child might be using the AAC system. For example, how could a child's communications board or switches be prepared to support peer interactions of play in specific areas? So other tools might also be in supporting peers and understanding how an AAC user can be fully included in different play areas. So for example, can we create a story that shows different ways that children might be communicating at the water table that includes both Spanish, American Sign Language, and the use of switches? So in our vignette with Diego, we can see how language is being supported through the use of Spanish and communication through the switch. How can others help facilitate communication and play activities? So this might be an adult who's modeling ways to communicate with the child using AAC during play and also prompting interactions with children at the center. So adults can also partner with other team members from the home to incorporate language as well as vocabulary that might be more commonly used in the home native language and to build this into the AAC system. So with targeted learning opportunities, it's likely that a child who is using an AAC system is going to need more intentional supports or ways of learning and practicing how to use these systems to communicate. And that might include getting support and collaboration from team members such as the speech language pathologist, paraprofessionals, general ed and special education teachers, and this might also include family members. So ideally, these instructional opportunities are going to be initiated within and across different routines and activities, just so that we can really work with the child in learning how to differentiate, but also generalize how AAC systems can be meaningfully used across their daily routines. Peers can also be a part of these different learning times, so providing spaces for them to interact and learn together, all the while we can continue to work on individualized goals. So rather than normalizing supports or learning that occurs by maybe pulling a child out of the classroom and doing a one-to-one with an adult, how can we center learning within the child's natural environment? So this provides opportunities to both acknowledge and honor difference in learning and also cultivate more positive relational aspects within the early childhood learning environment. What are some considerations for targeted learning opportunities that include an AAC that we must also address? So how can a peer be selected to support a targeted instructional opportunity? And are there ways for that child using an AAC system to be able to choose a friend at times that they might want to interact with, and at other times can a peer just volunteer to take part? Instead of positioning a targeted learning opportunity as a time to help the AAC user, how can we set things up so that both children are meaningfully learning together? And as part of this, can the peer also have a learning goal that might be embedded within this time so that both children are working on something together? And how can learning that takes place in a targeted learning opportunity also be supported throughout the day to encourage generalization of a skill and also ongoing interactions? So this might mean continuing with groupings of activities throughout the day and also just being intentional and mindful about praising the use of the skill when it's naturally occurring. Another strategy is to continue to promote school and home partnerships through the use of videotaping interactions. And that might include a child who is using an AAC system and their peers. And in that way, we can collaborate with families and also team members to kind of see what different kinds of interactions, communication are occurring, and to just loop families in on that process. So in this example, I actually pulled from back when I was in the classroom 2 years ago. I was teaching in an inclusive classroom, which utilized communication boards that were really centered around the vocabulary of the project-based theme of the month. And at that time, this was in the fall, so it was around nature. And during structured activities like circle time and small group activities, I tried to explicitly refer to the vocabulary around the five senses, and I tried to be mindful about providing multiple ways for children to participate through pointing at pictures, describing what they see. And I also had a student at the time who was also using an iPad in order to communicate. So I tried to generalize these supports into other routine activities. So when we were going on outdoor walks or making visits to the garden, I tried to intentionally split up children based in peers, I think based off of common interests and preferences. And we also brought along these communication boards as a way to encourage children to express what they see, hear, smell, and feel along their walk. So not only were children modeling various forms of communication, children were also beginning to learn that we can participate and engage in different ways. So visuals were also shared with families to strengthen home partnerships. And in this way, intentional opportunities to scaffold communication with and across peers can be meaningfully done. And the communication boards were also just built into the routine and activities of the day. Thank you so much. I'm going to transition back to Amber, who is going to do our closing reflections. Thanks.
Hello again. Thank you for staying with us for this long as we talk about supporting inclusive early childhood settings that include young AAC system users. I am glad that you've got to hear from my colleagues now, and I want to take now just a time to kind of summarize what we've talked about and also show you a handout that we've provided that hopefully can be a tool for you to reflect and collect information from your own setting so that you can use it to inform your own practice in this regard, and also to bring to your interdisciplinary teams, including families, to talk about this. So I'm going to share my screen again. So you will recall you met me first, I'm Amber, at the start of this presentation where I provided a bit of an interview and introduced you to Marcina and her early childhood classroom with the vignette. We're going to return to her again in a second. You then heard from my colleague, fellow speech language pathologist, Teresa, who gave a bit of an overview of augmentative and alternative communication systems, AAC systems. This is a topic that you can spend your whole life researching, and I feel very grateful for the partnerships that I personally have had with SLPs because they have an expertise in the subject that they can bring to interdisciplinary teams and help inform my practice as an early educator, an early childhood special educator. Then you were then introduced to my colleague Marissa, who's a fellow faculty member here at San Francisco State, and she began to talk about supporting inclusion of AAC users by thinking about the classroom learning environment, not only the physical environment, but also the learning environment and how we can use principles of universal design for learning in terms of really considering how multiple means of representation, multiple means of engagement, and multiple means of action and expression can be considered for many different types of learning in our early childhood classroom, including when we consider how to meaningfully include young children who are utilizing AAC systems as a means of communication. You then also heard from my colleague, Karina, who is completing her doctorate at SFSU and UC Berkeley. You might be able to hear my 3-year-old in the background just to keep this a little real. And she was also a teacher before this, and she helped us consider more about how to support young AAC users within small group instruction and play that includes both teacher-initiated and child-initiated opportunities. And then really thinking about there's going to be opportunities where a child using A child that is learning to use an AAC system will need targeted learning opportunities that perhaps are being led by an early educator, a special educator, an SLP, or someone else on the team. And considering how we can even utilize those opportunities to support inclusion by bringing peers in, by making them meaningful within the classroom environment, is just another tool that we can use. So now I want to just take a second to think about how we can actually put this into practice for you. We have created a worksheet, and this is part of the handouts that we will upload for this presentation. And this is just a tool that you can use if this might help you consider how you can more fully include some child or children that are using AAC systems. So again, it kind of follows what we talked about within this presentation. At the top, we have classroom learning environments, and this is just thinking about the entire learning environment and what you have in the classroom that is supporting inclusion of all kids, including a child that is using an AAC system. So does the learning environment facilitate meaningful peer interaction that includes AAC users? So just as we modeled in our presentation, it kind of follows it. So does the physical environment provide the space and accessibility for interactions that include the AAC system? Again, this is talking about physical environment. Can a child that is using their personal individualized AAC system easily utilize that within your circle time, small groups, play outside? So actually thinking about the physical environment. Is this something that a child is going to be able to access, learn, and participate within while they are utilizing a different form of communication? Are multiple means of communication and interactions represented in the classroom? So this is moving into our universal design for learning. When you look at the classroom, are there examples of different ways of communication and language being used? This might come in having labels, not only in English, but also other languages that are represented in your classroom and in the homes of the children. And as part of that, it can be representative of whatever kind of components that are within a child's AAC system, whether it's pictures of children using AAC systems. Maybe there are extra components of an AAC system, like a switch or picture cues, or even a communication board that isn't the one that the child is using, but extra ones that the children can engage in. Is there a doll or a stuffed animal that is using AAC? Are there books that represent individuals using AAC? All of these things are small steps in showing that all of these different ways of communication are valued, acknowledged, and seen, and that they're part of this classroom community. Next are multiple means of engagement between children valued and facilitated that include different means of communication. So how are we engaging children to talk to one another? How are we valuing different ways of engagement? How are we making space for a child to fully be able to participate if they are using a different form of communication than verbal communication? Are multiple means of expression and action supported that are inclusive of different ways to communicate and show learning? So are there spaces for us to not only just be asking children verbally to share what they have learned, but how can we also document and exploration and learning that value different forms of communication, including AAC? For each of these, we've left a little spot that says questions, ideas for classroom and classroom or the interdisciplinary team. So maybe this is a spot where you jot down things after doing some observation and thinking about your classroom or your program to say, like, hold it, here's something we can do. Maybe we can get this from home. Maybe we could create this. Maybe we could do this more. So to jot it down, either you for yourself for in your classroom, maybe within the team within your classroom, that could include paraprofessionals, volunteers, the family, or maybe it's within that child's interdisciplinary team that's including the SLP and others like occupational therapists or other administration or whatever that can include, so that you can talk about it as part of a team. Similarly, we move down to small group instruction and play. Does instruction and play with small groups of children value and support peer interactions that include AAC, as in terms of ensuring that we're building community within the children that are in your classroom? This can include, again, both teacher initiated small groups, something that's really valued and has lots of support in research for being a really awesome instructional method, taking a small group of kids and really working with them and where they're learning from. So in thinking about that, how can we again acknowledge and value and fully make these opportunities accessible for a young child using AAC systems? Further, and sometimes more difficult, for us because of a planning, is to think about child initiated play opportunities. How can we think about these? How can we ensure, if we know a child that's using an AAC system really loves blocks, how can we help support them in being able to access it? Maybe setting up their communication board, maybe talking to kids that are going to be with them so that we can help facilitate it. Is it important that there's an adult support there? What can we do so that that child can be initiating play with their peers and still be utilizing and valued for the way it means that they're communicating? Again, there's some question and ideas for the classroom or interdisciplinary team that you could jot down. And finally, for targeted learning opportunities for AAC users that promote generalization and peer interactions, thinking about where and when are these learning opportunities taking place. So where are we trying to help support a child in learning to use their AAC system? And as part of that, are at least some or maybe all of these opportunities within a classroom setting so that they can be generalized and meaningful within the routines and the activities? How often is a peer or peers part of this, and how are they chosen? So thinking about how can we get kids and other kids involved? Can the child using an AAC system make the choice? Can another child volunteer at times? Is it part of a grouping at center time? And so at times you're going to create it. That just becomes important when we think about inclusion and how that's chosen. How can these opportunities be mutually beneficial for both children? I think this is key with inclusion. We want to make sure that these opportunities are not just another child helping or supporting the child using AAC systems. Of course, that's part of it. But at the same time, how can the child using AAC systems also be helping and supporting the child that's joining them? What kind of goals and learning goals can we have when we're working with a group of 2 or 3 that include trying to use the AAC system? How can we include other goals that are also beneficial to those other kids? And again, there's opportunities for question and ideas that you can jot down. So we'll put this into a handout and you can download it and you can let us know if this is useful or if there would be more things that you would want to add to this. So to return back to Marcina. Marcina connected with families to request photos of their pets for show and tell. She worked with Diego's family to record a few comments about his family dog, Max, on the Switch, that Diego could share during circle time. Marcina also created a classroom book and programmed an accompanying switch from the images and descriptions shared by families of children and their pets. Marcina and the SLP, speech language pathologist, modeled using the book and switch during circle time and would highlight their use when children visited the reading corner, which is a pretty cute reading corner I just took a picture of. As Marcina observed Diego engaging with his peers using both the switch and images, she reflected on the meaningfulness of these interactions and looked forward to supporting more in the future. The one thing I want to make note within our whole presentation is that we've really tried to center the idea of a different type of means of communication. There is a growing understanding that when we don't need to differentiate or make somebody feel less than because they are not using verbal language. So the understanding that AAC systems are a valued means of communication is something that can be really important to bring into your classroom in terms of supporting diversity and supporting understanding of disability. I want to share at the very end just a shout out to a book. And it's actually just a beautiful book series in general. That's called A Kid's Books. And so if you Google a kid's book, there's so many things: a kid's book about belonging, a kid's book about inclusion, a kid's book about disabilities. And this book is written by this book is written by, I'm just pulling it up. Thank you for your patience as I find it once again. Thank you. A Kid's Book About Disabilities by Christine Napper. And Christine is somebody who identifies with a disability, and she shares about that at the beginning of the book. And then I wanted to share just a couple pages of this book, plugging it as a means of a book that could be used with a child or children as you, again, acknowledge that kids are learning and have different types of support needs, and that is something that can be acknowledged and valued within your classroom community. So a section of this book goes as this: I learned a lot from living with a disability, so I'd like to share some things with you. The first thing to know about people with disabilities is we are normal. Yep, that's right. We're not scary monsters, space aliens, or sad stories. Normal people come in all different shapes, sizes, and colors. Being normal means being different. Having a disability is one of the many ways to be normal. If you understand that disabled people are normal, then you'll have no problem with everything else we're going to talk about. And guess what? You're usually really good at this, kids. Sorry, grown-ups, you're usually not as good. Kids are good at being curious and respectful, including and not excluding. Grown-ups are usually just afraid they'll say or do the wrong thing. So if my disability is normal, how do you think I like to be treated? Normal. That's right, treat me normally. You might wonder whether it's okay to help me. The answer is sometimes. There are a lot of things I can do on my own, but some things I need help with. I might ask for your help opening a door, reaching something off the floor, or taking the cap off a marker. If you think I might need help, it's okay to ask. I'll either say yes, please, or no, thank you. But if I say no, please listen, because forced help really isn't helping. Another thing I don't like being stared at. It's just not polite. If you have a question about me, my chair, or my disability, it's okay to ask. Most of the time, it's totally okay. But some questions aren't nice. Some are kind of mean. Questions like, what's wrong with you? Tell me how you use the bathroom. What happened to you? Can you have babies? Try to avoid questions that would make the other person feel bad or embarrassed. So what do you talk about with a person who has a disability? Anything. Say, hi, how are you? How's your day going? Ask about what movies I like, where I grew up, or if my favorite ice cream flavor, or my favorite ice cream flavor, which it's cookie dough. I love talking about my disability, but it's not the only thing I want to talk about. One last thing I want you to know is that I'm not broken. I don't need to be fixed. In fact, my disability helps me be a wiser, kinder, stronger person. But there is something really important that needs to change: the world. I'm going to leave you with that part. I feel grateful that I get to be part of a field where I get to learn from individuals that have disabilities, and in my case, be able to support and come alongside young children who have disabilities and different types of support needs and their families. As part of that, I want to be able to advocate for inclusive settings that everyone, all young learners in my case, feel valued and acknowledged. I thank you for joining us for this conversation about specifically thinking about young learners who are using a different means of communication, AAC systems, and starting to consider and reflect about how we can meaningfully include these children within our classrooms and programs. I welcome any feedback on this presentation. I include my email at the end of our PowerPoint that you can email. I am interested in your thoughts. I'm interested if you have more questions about our program. And I just hope you have a wonderful conference. It is a pleasure, and I can say this on behalf of my colleagues, it's a pleasure to be part of the California Association of the Education of Young Children's annual conference. And thank you for spending this time with us.